Hello, I am Eddie O'Sullivan, and this is This Week in the Italian Campaign. This week in the Italian campaign, the Canadian advance from Foggia, the start of the Battle of Termoli, and my special guest, Mr. Gavin Mortimer, who will talk about the role of special forces in the battle. At the end of September, the German army had been ordered to withdraw to a defensive line that ran from the estuary of the Volturno River on the Tyrrhenian Sea through the Apennines to Termoli on the Adriatic. It was named the Volturno Line. West of the Apennines, the line was held by 6 German divisions, including 16th Panzer Division, which had borne the brunt of the fighting at Salerno. East of the Apennines, the German withdrawal was screened by the remnants of the 1st Parachute Division. At dawn on the 1st of October, the 5th Army was poised to enter Naples, which the Germans had abandoned. Meanwhile, the 8th Army was preparing to advance west from Foggia, which the Germans had abandoned 3 days earlier. The town was at the heart of an aviation complex comprising a main airfield and 12 satellite landing grounds and a major railway hub. It had been bombed since May and has suffered more than 20,000 casualties. Foggia was to be the base for heavy bomber attacks on France, Germany, Austria and the Balkans, which were inaccessible from airfields in the UK. It was also to become an Allied command centre for ground forces in southern Italy and naval forces in the Adriatic Sea. Following the fall of Foggia on the 27th of September, 8th Army Commander General Montgomery set 2 objectives. The first was to capture Highway 87 that ran through the Apennines from Termoli to Naples. The second were the port cities of Pescara and Ancona. Highways from both ran to Rome, which the Allies hoped to capture by Christmas. With Italy's autumn rainy season imminent, there was no time to lose. The 78th Division was ordered to advance by land on the coastal road, while the 1st Canadian Division aimed for Vinciaturo, a road junction southwest of Campobasso at the foot of the Matese Mountains. On the 1st of October, the Canadian Division started to advance from Lucera behind an advance guard tasked to deal with enemy rearguards along Highway 87. It came under machine gun fire as it started to climb to the village of Motta Montecorvino on the 1st Maine Ridge. Each side of the highway, the ridge was defended by machine gun posts and 88mm guns of the 1st Parachute Division. An attack by infantry and tanks started at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The village was taken the next day. It was the Canadian Division's first major battle since landing on the mainland 4 weeks earlier. It was also their first taste of a new pattern of enemy behaviour: fierce resistance up to an unpredictable moment, followed by a rapid withdrawal to another dominant feature. It would take the Canadians almost 2 weeks to get to Campobasso. On the Adriatic coast, a different tactic was used. An amphibious operation that would involve sending troops by sea around the Cape Gargano to Termoli, while land forces, including tanks, would advance by road. The amphibious landing was named Operation Devon, and at this point, Termoli was defended by a battle group numbering fewer than 400 troops, including some paratroopers. The Special Service Brigade was assembled to carry out the job. It comprised about 1,000 men from No. 3 and No. 40 Royal Marine Commandos and the Special Raiding Squadron led by Major Paddy Maine. Both 3 Commando and the Special Raiding Squadron were under strength. 40 Commando was full strength, and he was given the job of spearheading the attack into Termoli town and its harbour after the landing. The brigade was commanded by 34-year-old John Durnford Slater, He was a veteran of the Dieppe Raid and Operation Husky and had previously commanded 3 Commando. Both 3 and 40 commandos had landed at Porto San Venere in Calabria in the 8th Army invasion of the mainland in September. They travelled from Calabria in infantry landing craft and landed in Bari on the 1st of October, exhausted. Durnford Slater dispatched a reconnaissance patrol from 40 Commando to Manfredonia. It encountered little opposition. The flotilla arrived in Manfredonia harbour later that evening. The Special Raiding Squadron travelled to the town by land. Durnford Slater met General Miles Dempsey of 13 Corps. It had been ordered to advance to Termoli. 11th Brigade of the 78th Battle Axe Division was to take the lead. The operation was postponed by 24 hours to the night of the 2nd of October so that the commandos could get some rest. The brigade left Manfredonia at midnight on the 2nd of October in 4 infantry landing craft with 7 assault craft to be used in the landing itself. As it approached Termoli around 2 hours later, the Germans demolished 2 bridges over the Biferno River south of the town as they prepared to meet and advance by land. An amphibious landing, however, was not anticipated. 3 infantry landing craft got stuck on a sandbank 2 kilometres from the beach. There was a sudden storm with force 5 winds. 40 Commando landed around 2:30. It passed through the bridgehead made by 3 Commando and followed the railway line for 2 kilometres into Termoli to a railway bridge where it was fired on. It pressed on to the station where prisoners were taken, including a demolition team that was going to blow it up. By first light, the port was taken. 3 Commando also followed the rail line. They captured a train with German soldiers asleep inside. The German commander was caught in his pyjamas and shaving. 3 Commando took a position on Termoli's outskirts south of the railway line. The SRS reached the destroyed bridge over the Biferno and linked up with the Lancashire Fusiliers moving by land from the south around midday. It later occupied a monastery in Termoli overlooking the beach. 40 Commando moved west to block the road into Termoli and captured a convoy of trucks. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the town was cleared of enemy. 11th Brigade found the Biferno was initially shallow enough to wade. 8 6-pounder anti-tank guns were taken across on rafts. A pontoon bridge built by 11 o'clock allowed the scout cars of the 56th Reconnaissance Regiment commanded by Kendall Chavaz to enter the Termoli enclave. The pontoon was eventually swept away as the river rose. The Biferno had become impassable. The 78th Division advance party in Termoli was cut off from heavy artillery, support troops from 11th Brigade and tanks from the County of London Yeomanry. These all were in turn sitting targets for the Luftwaffe. By dawn, the Special Services Brigade, the 56th Recce and the Lancashire Fusiliers held a perimeter from the landing beach to the Biferno. Reinforcements were just over the river, and 3 battalions of 36th Brigade were to land at Termoli that night. A 2nd Brigade in the form of the 38th Irish Brigade would soon arrive by sea too, but they were isolated and holding a defensive line almost 13 kilometres long, and a German counterattack was being planned involving 16th Panzer Division, which was racing to Termoli from the Abruzzi Mountains. The story of the Battle for Termoli and the largest tank battle in Italy in the Second World War will be told in the next episode of This Week in the Italian Campaign.
All right. Okay, well, that's the introduction to the Battle of Termoli, and we'll be discussing that in much more detail in a minute. But before I do, I want to introduce you, I'm going to do this every week, to a book that you might care to read. And this one, which is a broad introduction to the Italian campaign, it's by Richard Doherty, who is an author based in Northern Ireland, an expert on the armed forces of the British Army. And his book is a very good guide to the 8th Army's campaign in Italy, and I suggest you get hold of it if you can. And so now, I'm now very pleased to welcome our live guest, and that is Mr. Gavin Mortimer, who joins us from Paris. Hello, Gavin.
Evening, Eddie. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Gavin is an historian, an author, and he's written extensively about the special services, the SAS and the SRS. So, Gavin, first of all, just a bit of background about the Special Raiding Squadron, as it was called in this operation, but the SAS, as people know. Give us some background about it.
The SRS came into being March 1943. David Stirling, the commander of one SAS, they'd been granted regimental status in September 1942. Unfortunately, David Stirling was captured in Tunisia in January 43. There's a period of uncertainty. It's been described as chaos by several of the officers who were in the SAS at the time. And eventually it was sorted out. You had Paddy Maine took over from David Stirling. One SAS became the Special Raiding Squadron just for the duration of 1943. And they very quickly evolved and adapted and became an amphibious assault regiment throughout 1943, and they participated in the invasion of Sicily on July the 10th, very successful operation neutralizing a gun battery in Cape Muro de Porco, just south of Syracuse, and then 3 days later at Augusta, which was an important enemy naval base. And in September the 4th, 1943, they took part in the invasion of Italy, landing at Bagnara. Again, quite a brief operation, but a successful one, securing the town ahead of the main British infantry who landed at Reggio 11 miles south. So they'd really proved themselves in the space of a short space of time. And that was due mainly to Paddy Maine, who was an exceptional commander, really led by example. And but Termoli was to prove their biggest challenge yet.
Well, let me just a little bit about the SRS, or the Special Raiding Squadron, which is otherwise known as the Special Air Services, SAS, famous across the world. What kind of men were they? I mean, they were all volunteers. You weren't conscripted into the SAS in the Second World War. You had to volunteer, but to be selected, you had to be a very special kind of person. What kind of person got in to the SAS and the SRS?
Well, they were looking more at mental toughness, mental aptitude. It was initiative, able to work on your own or as part of a small team, intelligence, and great mental flexibility. And so I think the average soldier, they weren't gong hunters, to use the vernacular of the time. They didn't volunteer to get medals. They volunteered in the main part. Certainly, I interviewed about 75 or so wartime SAS veterans out of a frustration at the lack of action that they'd seen in the infantry or the guards, and so they volunteered. Initially, the initial intake was in the summer of 1941. They came from the commandos, particularly number 8 Guards Commando and number 11 Scottish Commando. And then they recruited throughout 1942. And when, as I said earlier, they became a regiment in September 42, that's when they really expanded very quickly to a strength of around about 400. That was whittled down to approximately 250 for the Special Raiding Squadron. So you had men who were very highly motivated, physically very fit. The training wasn't particularly the SAS training. It was understood that you already had a very good fitness because they'd been in the commandos or the infantry training at the time. It was more about getting the men used to this new form of guerrilla warfare.
Right. And but the SAS, the men in the SAS, all of them had already had extensive service, including battlefield service, before they were taken into the SAS and SRS. That's how it worked. And Paddy Maine, tell me a little bit about him, because He was the commanding officer for the SRS in Termoli. He was a rugby international, played for Ireland, from Northern Ireland. So he was super fit anyway. But tell me a little bit more about him briefly.
Well, he was a very intelligent man too. There's been a lot of, if you read some books and watched some TV programs today, you'd believe that he was some mindless thug. He'd studied law at Queen's in Belfast, and he just before the outbreak of war, he joined one of Belfast's top firm of solicitors. So he was as mentally accomplished as he was physically accomplished. As you said, he played for Ireland, also played for the Irish and British Lions, went on the 38 tour to South Africa, where the South Africans rated him as the outstanding player, or the tourist. Very good boxer too, university boxing champion. And he had joined number 11 Commando in 1940, one of the first commandos. He'd seen action at Litani River in Syria. And he had a reputation for standing no nonsense from senior officers. He'd left number 11 Scottish Commando after a bit of a set to with Major Geoffrey Keyes, his CO, who was the epitome of the upper class Englishman. Paddy Maine he did not see eye to eye with the majority of that class, and he found his niche in the SAS. And the men, he was just he was built mentally, he was physically and mentally, he was perfect for this form of guerrilla warfare. And he was very agile for such a big man. Mentally, he was agile too, and he inspired the men around him. I spoke to countless men who served with Maine, who said what a charismatic leader he was. He wasn't reckless. He never took an undue risk. He weighed up every operation, planned as much as he could, and had his men's welfare very much at the heart of everything he did. But when he went into battle, he was ferocious. And he was very good at what he did too. And so he was really the ideal leader to, after the capture of Stirling, when they were in a state of flux, he was the ideal man to get hold of the regiment and to take them forward into the Mediterranean, into Europe, and into a new form of warfare.
Yes, and he finished the war as one of the most highly decorated men in the British Army. Some people think he should have been given a Victoria Cross. I'm not going to go into that now. He survived the war. He went back to Northern Ireland. And then, after all the risks that he'd run and all the dangers he'd seen, he died in a car accident, which is extraordinary. But let's move on now to this operation. It's a bit of a weird one for the SRS because normally they liked operating on their own, didn't they? But they were put together with two commando formations, and the commandos, of course, are actually, technically speaking, part of the Royal Navy. The SAS is part of the Army, so you had two services put together, and then the commanding officer was a commando. In hindsight, what do people in the SAS say about the fact that it was put into a almost 1,000-man operation, operating with two other formations they had actually been closely associated with, and then with a commanding officer who was not from their team? So what did people say about that?
They weren't. That wasn't really an issue because they didn't. While they were part of a special service brigade, they operated very much on their own. So they landed after number 40 Royal Marine Commando and number 3 Commando, and they had their separate instructions. So the SRS, there were 3 troops. They were approximately at this stage around about 240 men strong, divided into 3 troops, 1, 2, and 3. And their orders were 1 and 3 troops were to secure the bridge over the Perferno and secure the road. And then number 2 troop were to push inland southwest just to secure the high ground and to attack the Germans as they withdrew. So initially they landed and they moved through the town very quickly. They didn't, as I said, they didn't have any affiliation with the other 2 units of the Special Service Brigade, and they achieved their objectives very well. And really, by I have to say, in fact, they were so swift in moving inland that one section of 3 Troop overtook the Germans and were actually captured themselves, led by John Tonkin, and about 20 of them fell into enemy hands. As this was the first parachute regiment, as the Germans, as they withdrew, and but otherwise it was very successful. And by 1 o'clock on October the 3rd, effectively the Battle of Termoli for the Special Service Brigade was over. That they'd achieved their objective as the advance elements of the 78th Division were occupying the town, so it was job done.
Yeah, at that point they was just waiting to get back on the landing craft because they didn't have enough landing craft. So the landing craft, they dropped the SSB, the Special Service Brigade, that went back to pick up the 36th Brigade, which came. They dropped the 36th Brigade, went back to get the 38th Brigade. So they were waiting for landing craft to take them back. They thought their job had been done. And they had withdrawn, all of them, to the monastery. That photograph I showed of the monastery, it looks rather tatty in Termoli, and that was their base. But things went wrong, didn't they? It didn't work out the way they expected. They were put back into the line, but also they suffered one of the most traumatic moments in the SAS's history in the Second World War.
Well, that's right. There was one section of 2 Troop who'd spent the night on the late afternoon of October the 3rd. Paddy Maine moved his men back into town, and they took up billets in the monastery, as you just mentioned, Eddie. Apart from one unit led by Lieutenant Peter Davis, who were about 5 miles outside town on a ridge to the southwest of Termoli. They passed the night peacefully. And their radio had broken, so that's why they didn't get instructions to fall back into town. So dawn broke on October the 4th, and Davis began to move his men back into town towards Termoli. As he did so, there was sporadic shelling, which they thought was a bit odd. And this was the start of a counterattack by the Germans from Battle Group Stempel of the 16th Panzer Division, and it was by really the morning, the evening, the night of October the 4th, October the 5th is when the main German attack came, and by the morning of October the 5th, Termoli was being pounded by the German artillery, and it was at that point, as the Germans attacked from the western line of Termoli, that Paddy Maine received orders to send reinforcements up to where some of the commandos were, and 78th Division to reinforce the line. So there were 5 trucks pulled into the side road just by the monastery, and the first section out was Johnny Wiseman's section. That was of 1 Troop, and they climbed into the first lorry. And Johnny Wiseman, who I met and I interviewed, he was in the cab. Red Seekings, his sergeant major, was just doing up the tailboard of a truck when suddenly a salvo of shells came over, and one landed slap bang in the middle of the truck and blew it to bits and killed 18 of the men inside the truck, which was the worst single incident in terms of casualties that the SAS suffered in World War II. Johnny Wiseman survived without a scratch. So did Red Seekings, and it was Johnny Wiseman then, obviously shell-shocked, reported to Paddy Maine and said, in effect, I've got no troop left. So Paddy Maine, again, an example of his innate leadership, just quietly took control of the situation. Several of the men who were climbing into the second truck were also shell shocked, and so Paddy Maine just got the rest of them up to the defensive line, kept them occupied, and that's where they spent the next 24 hours really, until the arrival of 38th Brigade. Which was the turning point in the battle and broke the German attack.
Cool. What do you think, looking back in history, about how that mixed unit of the recce units, the commandos, they had 1 anti-tank gun and the SRS, how they handled the situation?
That's right. There was a comment. Harry Pote, who was the 2IC of the SRS, passed an officer of the 78th Division and pointed to his shoulder flash of a battle axe and said, "What's that exactly?" And the officer proudly looked and said, "It's a battle axe." And Harry Pote said it should be a knitting needle. So there was a sort of, which I think was harsh, really. It was a very confused situation. And no one, they had poor intelligence. Chavas, who you just mentioned, Eddie, was under the impression that the 16th Panzer group was on the near Naples, and suddenly here it was attacking him. So they had poor intelligence. The weather was very bad, which delayed some elements of the infantry reaching Termoli. But also, I think these are the teething problems that you had. This was a new, as I said, this amphibious assault. Commando operations were relatively new, and that liaison with the infantry was still in its infancy. So there was a poor communication on both sides. No one, they were taken by surprise. The ferocity and I think also the swiftness of a German counterattack. So it was a disorganized situation. And I've read comments from the commandos, the Royal Marine Commander, number 40 commandos, critical of the SRS, a little bit critical of the commandos. So there was a lot of sort of criticism. But I think it was more the fact that it was a very confused situation, and everyone was fighting in their own little section, not aware of the orders, the instructions that the other regiments, the other units had been given. So there may have been that led to a bit of resentment. Yeah. But generally, I think that they did well actually to counter the German counterattack. So they'd secured Termoli very rapidly. The operation was over, and then suddenly the Germans launched this furious assault, and they reacted actually reasonably quickly. And I think that's to the credit of both the Special Service Brigade and the 78th Division and 38th Brigade, who came up arrived on the 5th. And actually, I've spoken to several of the SRS men I interviewed who said how impressed they were with the speed with which the Irish boys and the Irish armour just came up and pushed the Germans back. And as I said, really, that signalled the end of the Battle of Termoli. Yeah. So I think yes, there were problems, but overall, I think it was pretty successful.
It was actually Canadian tanks, Gavin.
Canadian tanks
with the Royal Irish. So, in the context of the Second World War, the whole experience of the Special Air Service, the SES, in the Second World War, how does Termoli fit in there? Was it, a good, a triumph, something in the middle, something bad? What were the casualties? How does it fit in? What were the? How did the High Command react to all this? Did they make any significant decisions based upon what happened in Termoli, do you think?
Well, firstly, I've spoke to several men who fought at Termoli, and they said what a hellish experience it was. It was their first and only taste of being in an infantry battle, and they did not enjoy it. And one chap I spoke to, Bob Lowson, who joined the commandos, one of the first in the summer of 1940, said, fought with the commandos until he joined the SAS in late 42. He said, up until Termoli, I'd enjoyed the war. It had been good fun, but Termoli changed me. After that, the war had no fun for me whatsoever. So I think it really did. It was a bitter, bloody battle. They lost 21 men in total. Another 22 were captured, and they also lost a couple of dozen wounded. But General Dempsey, who was commander of 13 Corps, visited them a few days later and said, praised them very much, and said that in the 3 months since we landed in Sicily. During that time, we've carried out 4 successful operations, brilliantly planned and brilliantly carried out. So I think that was testament to the adaptability of the SAS and how they took on this new role and did it very successfully.
And of course, Dempsey then in due course was involved in Operation Overlord, had a major role there in Northwest Europe. And of course, the SAS was there, and Paddy Maine and his team were there in Northwest Europe. So the story continued. Gavin, look, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, Eddie.
It's a terrific story. And I'm sure that we'd love to talk again in due course in a future episode about some aspect of the campaign. So thanks very much. Great. So anyway, and that's it for this week. I want to thank Gavin Mortimer for coming on today and discussing this exceptional formation. But from me and everybody at This Week in the Italian campaign, it is goodbye, good luck, and God bless.